Wife called her ex's feet beautiful, sent me spiraling into a bizarre jealousy over attractive toes, and now I'm questioning everything. My wife and I have been married for 4 years. I'll call her Abby. Our marriage has always been strong, full of love, laughter, mutual respect, and lately, we've even been talking about starting a family. I truly wouldn't say I have any complaints. Except for this odd shadow from Abby's past that's lately slipped into the corner of my mind. Before she met me, Abby was in a relationship with this guy named Brock for 2 years. She told me she was madly in love with him, but ultimately had to walk away because he was verbally abusive. Soon after she left Brock, our paths crossed, and the rest is history, or so I thought. I always assumed Abby had let Brock go, that the chapter was closed. But every now and then, she drops a comment that makes me feel a twist of jealousy, or worse, insecurity. There was this one conversation. Abby explained why she tolerated Brock's abuse for so long, saying that he was so attractive she could barely make eye contact. I remember how those words hung in the air afterward. She's never said anything like that about me, never mentioned being so mesmerized by my looks she couldn't look me in the eye. It was hard not to hear that as Brock being more attractive to her, and it stung. Still, I kept my mouth shut, mostly because Abby gets upset if I mention Brock. And there have been other small things. Now and then she'll talk about something Brock did, and I'll catch this far-off look in her eyes, almost as if she's still under his spell. It wasn't frequent or always obvious, so I just tried to ignore it. There was even a time I confessed to Abby that I felt a bit jealous, maybe even threatened, by this ghost from her past. Brock just sounded like this impossibly attractive guy. She reassured me that she didn't see him that way anymore, that she loved me, and I let myself believe it. But 2 nights ago, Abby said something that I haven't been able to shake. We were sprawled out on the couch, Netflix playing in the background, both a few drinks in. Somehow the talk drifted to feet, how both of us think feet are objectively kind of gross, and how we don't get the foot fetish thing. I lifted my bare foot in the air and joked, "Can you imagine anyone liking my feet? I have gross feet." She laughed and agreed in that playful, teasing way. But then, after just a moment, Abby said, "The only person's feet I would ever consider attractive is Brock's feet. He had the most beautiful feet." The words killed the conversation instantly. She didn't even really seem to notice. Instead, she just stared off into space, and I quietly turned back to the TV, trying not to let my face betray what I was feeling. The next morning, she acted as though nothing had happened. Maybe it was the alcohol, maybe it was just a careless comment, but it's been gnawing at me. It's not even just about Brock. It's like, first my feet are ugly, and then his are beautiful? Somehow, it made me feel smaller, not even a rival for her affection, but something lesser. Now Abby's picking up on my weird mood. This morning, she asked me if something was wrong. I told her nothing, but the truth is I can't just brush it off. I want to find a way past this, but I worry if I even bring up Brock, it could go badly. We're stuck together in the house for at least the next 2 weeks, so there's no easy escape if things go sour. And I really don't want it to go that way. So here I am, turning things over in my mind. Should I sit Abby down and talk about this? Ask her if she's really over Brock, and where I stand in all of it. Or is this all just a silly, insecure spiral I need to climb out of on my own? Update 1. That night, I was sitting on the bed, just kind of brooding, when Abby came in. She sat next to me and looked at me with concern written all over her face. She must have sensed something was wrong, because I hadn't been myself these last few days, and ever since her comment about my feet, things in our bedroom had been completely dead. She gently asked me if everything was okay. I managed a weary smile and told her no, it really wasn't. She looked even more worried and softly asked if we could talk about it. For a moment I just sat there, heavy with silence. Abby didn't look defensive or nervous, only genuinely concerned. It dawned on me that maybe she didn't realize how much those Brock comments hurt, so I decided to just lay everything out honestly. I asked her if she was willing to be 100% honest with me about everything. She nodded with complete sincerity, so I took a shaky breath and asked if she was truly happy being married to me. I needed to know if maybe she'd rather be with someone else, with him, instead of me. Abby looked a little shocked at the question, adamantly told me she'd never dream of marrying anyone else. The whole time, my voice was shaking, and I could see she was on the edge of tears, too. So I let it all spill out. I told her how, a few nights before, we'd been talking about feet and she had said mine were gross but Brock's were beautiful. I admitted it sounded silly, but that comment crushed me and made me feel ugly. At that point, she gasped and started crying. I explained how there had been other times where she mentioned Brock with a sort of longing in her voice, as though she missed him, how it felt like she was enamored with him. I confessed that I thought Brock was probably a lot more attractive than me, and maybe Abby would have preferred staying with him. Abby cried for what seemed like forever, probably just 2 minutes, but it stretched on, before she could speak. She said she didn't realize she'd been mentioning Brock like that and how much it had been hurting me. She assured me she couldn't imagine marrying anyone but me. I asked, in a choked voice, even though I'm uglier than Brock? Which made her break down again, sobbing. After she pulled herself back together, she admitted that, yes, Brock had been a very attractive man, and she had been infatuated with him. I could see how hard those words were for her to say. She explained, though, that Brock had also been controlling and incredibly cruel. She never felt safe or at ease with him, but with me, she finally felt safe. She told me she'd married me, wanted children with me, and had never even dreamed of marrying Brock or having kids with him. We moved on to some much deeper, personal stuff that I'd honestly rather keep private. I also brought up some of the advice I'd gotten about trauma bonding and recovering from abusive exes, and Abby admitted she did feel addicted to the drama with Brock. She agreed to talk with her counselor about those leftover issues. That conversation lasted well over an hour, with both of us crying a lot throughout. When it was over, I felt so much lighter, like a heavy fog had finally lifted. We cuddled for a while, and I tried to lighten things up by joking that she was officially stuck with my nasty feet for life. She took my head in her hands and told me she thought I had the most beautiful feet in the world because they're mine. That got us laughing, and then, for the first time in a week, we made out and made love. I know that's a bit much to share, but after everything, I think it's important that the ending was happy. So, for now, I feel like the issue is largely settled. Maybe I overreacted a bit, but the pain I felt, feeling less attractive by accident, was real. I'm very glad I trusted my feelings enough to speak up instead of just burying them. Even so, there's a lingering sadness. I do still feel a pang knowing I'm not as attractive as Abby's ex, not out of jealousy, but because I desperately want to be the best for her in every possible way, including physically. That's something I'm learning to accept. Perhaps a lot of us eventually have to make our peace with not always being the most of everything. What matters is that Abby and I are moving in the right direction together, and we are both committed to working through these feelings with empathy and honesty. This isn't some magical overnight fix, but it's real progress, and that's what counts to me. Update 2. The universe didn't wait long to test us. 2 days after that long talk, we ran out for coffee and groceries. It was one of those quiet, ordinary afternoons where the world feels soft around the edges. Gray sky, everything damp from a light drizzle, my hand tucked into Abby's back pocket like I sometimes do when we're weaving past people with carts. We were standing in line at the little cafe inside the store, Abby debating out loud whether to get something sweet, when I felt her go still, beside me. Not a flinch, more like her whole ribcage decided to lock up. I turned to see where she was looking, and there he was. I had built him up in my head to be some movie star apparition, but Brock was just a guy. Tall, well put together, neatly trimmed beard and that stiff, expensive jacket men wear when they're trying to project competence. He also had this scan to him. The way his eyes moved over the room didn't feel like looking, it felt like measuring. When his gaze hit Abby, he smiled in a way that didn't reach the top half of his face. "Abigail," he said, as if he'd just found something he'd misplaced. She didn't say anything at first, just slid her hand down and laced her fingers with mine so tightly our knuckles clicked. I could feel a tremor in her palm, tiny and stubborn. Then, evenly, "Hi, Brock." She didn't step toward him. She didn't shrink either. He glanced at me. I introduced myself. Her husband. I braced for how that would feel, to stand within arm's length of the person who'd been haunting my insecurities. Instead, what I felt was this very simple clarity. Whatever used to exist between them was not romance. It was adrenaline. Even the way he positioned his body, blocking the line like the room belonged to him, told its own story. He tried small talk, the kind that pretends to be harmless but is a hook, asking if she still lived over by the park, if her mom was doing better, if she wanted to catch up sometime. His voice had a thread of amusement running through it, like our being together was cute. Abby didn't look at me for help. She squared her shoulders and said, calmly, "No. I'm not interested in catching up." She added, "Please don't contact me." The woman behind the counter called out an order. A milk steamer hissed. Brock's smile went a hair brittle. He said, "Well, you know where I am," as if that were a kindness, and then he moved off, carrying his paper cup like a prop. We made it through paying and walked to the car in silence, our bags cutting into our fingers. Abby held it together until the doors shut. Then the breath she'd been holding turned into a sound, half sob, half laughter, like relief colliding with an earthquake. She pressed her forehead to the steering wheel and said, muffled, "I hated how he said my name." "Did you hear it? Like he owns it." I leaned across the console and wrapped my arms around her. I told her I was proud of her. We sat there like that for a while, the car windows fogging slightly, and when we finally pulled back she was shaking her head in disbelief, her mouth pulled into a crooked smile. "You're going to laugh," she said, "but remember the stupid thing I said about his feet?" She closed her eyes for a second, then looked at me. "He used to get pedicures every Friday and make comments about how other people's were disgusting. It wasn't that they were beautiful. It was that everything had to be controlled. I think I made it pretty in my head so it wouldn't feel so creepy." We drove home. She called her counselor and left a message, voice still wobbly. I carried the groceries in and tried not to hover. Later, when we were unpacking, Abby pulled a shoebox down from the top of our hall closet. She sat on the floor and opened it. Old photos, a smooth flat rock from some hike, a concert stub. She lifted things out like she was handling evidence. I sat with her in the doorway and let her be the one to decide. Most of it went straight into a trash bag without ceremony. She kept one thing, this uneven ceramic bowl she'd made back then, mint green and a little lopsided. "I made this even when he told me I was wasting time," she said. "I kind of want to use it for keys." That night, around 9, Abby's phone buzzed with an unknown number. For a second we just looked at it. She clicked it open and there it was, a paragraph of apology that wasn't an apology. Lines about thinking of the good times, about how he wasn't that guy anymore, about how Abigail, you owe me the chance to show you. No threats, nothing that would set off alarms to anyone outside of it, but it made my skin crawl all the same, the way the wording wrapped itself in duty. Abby didn't go fetal. She didn't spiral. She slid the phone across the couch to me like we were passing a salt shaker, rested her chin on my shoulder, and said, quietly, can you deal with it? So I did. I typed 5 words, do not contact her again. I hit send. I blocked the number. She watched my thumbs move and nodded once, slow. Then she put both her feet in my lap, wiggled her toes, and said, with a tiny grin that broke my chest open, massage? We fell back into that ridiculous ease that had felt so far away for a week. Her calves are always a little tight because she runs upstairs 2 at a time. I worked the knots out while we watched a baking show where nothing bad happens to anyone, and that simple, boring domesticity felt like a victory. The next day, Abby had her counseling session. When she came home, she told me something that stuck with me. She said trauma makes you memorize the person who hurt you, like your brain thinks knowing every contour will keep you safe next time. It's not romance. It's survival. She said she was done letting survival masquerade as devotion. And then, almost as an afterthought, she told me her counselor asked what she wanted to put in that empty space where the memorizing used to live. You, she said, looking at me like she wasn't trying to perform, like she was choosing something quiet and enormous. I want it to be you. I don't mean it solved everything overnight, seeing him knock something loose in her, like an old window opening after being painted shut for years. The draft is real. But so is the light. And I will say this, petty or not, up close, Brock's not a myth. His left eye twitches when he's annoyed. His jaw works before he speaks. His shoes were wet from the rain and left dark prints on the tile as he walked away. Abby squeezed my hand and chose not to follow. This morning she made coffee while I tried to fix a wobbly chair leg, and at one point I looked up and she was watching me with this expression I can't fully describe, soft, a little amused, very present. She crossed the room and tucked her toes under my thigh to warm them. Beautiful, she said, and I didn't hear it as a consolation prize this time. I heard it as a decision. Update 3. 3 mornings after Abby's counseling session, my phone lit up with an email that made my jaw do that slow, stupid open close like a fish. Subject line was just Abby? And the sender's name was a first name paired with a blank little gray circle. The body was a few lines, shaky in places, like the letters themselves were trying not to touch. She said she was dating Brock. She said she'd found an old group photo where Abby was tagged and then gone down a small rabbit hole and found my update from a year ago where I'd posted about fixing a leaking sink. I'm not trying to intrude, she wrote, I just need to know if I'm imagining this. He says I'm dramatic. He says you were too. She left a number. I read it twice. Then I handed the phone to Abby without saying anything. She didn't flinch at the name. She read it, breathed out just once, and said, I want to call her. There wasn't a tremor in it. She dialed from our kitchen, standing by the window where the light makes our aloe plant look like it's composed of glass blades. The woman answered on the second ring. Up close her voice had these careful pauses, like she was moving through a house in the dark and didn't want to bump into anything. They spoke for 20 minutes. Abby didn't trash him. She didn't diagnose. She told the truth in small, square pieces you could hold in your palm. She said he was very charming. She said he made schedules for things that didn't need schedules. She said she found herself rearranging her day so he'd never have to wait alone at the door. She said he was funny until he wasn't. The woman was quiet for a long stretch and then said, almost like she was ordering from a menu, he takes me for pedicures every Friday. He says it's self-care. He says the way other women let their feet look is disrespectful. I watched Abby close her eyes, just once, like a shutter. She said, evenly, that's not about care. At the end, the woman thanked her and apologized twice for bothering her and hung up. Abby stood with her hands still around the phone, staring down at our counter's little constellation of knife marks. Then she set the phone down very gently, like it could explode, and said, she's going to think about it. The next day there was a call from an advocate with the court. The woman, her name was Mara, had filed for a protective order. She'd given Abby's number as a prior partner who might be willing to write a statement. No one asked Abby to come in person. They were careful about that. Only if you want, the advocate said, voice like a blanket you tuck around someone's shoulders in a waiting room at 3 a.m. Abby stood in our doorway with the phone tucked to her ear and looked at me. I didn't nod. I didn't shake my head. I just stood up so we were the same height. I'll write one, she said. And I'll come. Her counselor helped her keep it to facts. Dates where she could, examples where she couldn't, no adjectives that could be spun as spite. Watching her draft it was like watching a surgeon stitch, deliberate, clean, nothing showy. She signed it, printed it, slid it into a manila folder with the same care she'd used with the shoebox. The courthouse smelled like dry paper and the ghost of somebody's coffee. The security guard asked us to put our keys in a plastic tray. His belt creaked when he turned. In the waiting area there were these rows of wooden benches too shiny to be comfortable. A couple in matching windbreakers whispered loudly. A little boy pressed his finger into a sign that said no food or drink and left a perfect oval of chocolate. We didn't see him at first. Then there he was, reflected faintly in the glass of a vending machine, and then not reflected but real, walking down the hall with a woman in a suit I suspect was rented. He wore the same stiffness as at the cafe, like he was a photograph walking. He saw Abby and did that smile again, the one that thinks it's a privilege, and said, "Abigail," in a tone that tried to put a leash on syllables. A bailiff was there before the tail end of her name stopped ringing in my ears. "Sir, you don't speak to her," the bailiff said, an old kind of kindness under the order. Brock's jaw flickered once. He looked at me like I'd personally conspired with gravity. He adjusted his cufflink, which didn't need adjusting. Mara sat 2 rows ahead of us, flanked by a woman wearing an advocate's badge and a man with a notebook. I recognized her from a photo she'd sent Abby, but photographs round off edges. In person there was a thinness to her that had nothing to do with weight. She had covered a bruise on her wrist with one of those hair ties that looks like a phone cord. She glanced back and caught Abby's eye and something unclenched in her mouth. Not a smile, a small relief that someone else had seen the same weather. When the judge came in, everyone stood. The room went that strange courthouse quiet where you can hear the scratch of someone's pen across the aisle. Cases before theirs dealt with dog bites and a landlord who kept forgetting to turn on heat. Then, their names. Not his voice at the front of it for once. The clerk asked Mara to speak. She didn't shake. She kept her hands flat on the paper she'd brought, like she was ironing it as she read. The details were small. He rearranged her bookshelf by height and told her it looked sloppy otherwise. He texted her every hour on the hour. If she missed one, he sent 20 more, all with the same content. "Where are you?" until the phone looked like it was stuttering. He would touch the back of her neck in the grocery store and steer her like a shopping cart. He hadn't hit her. She said that like a confession and then winced. The lawyer did the thing they do where they try to turn the word preference into mutual choice. He asked if she'd ever enjoyed a Friday pedicure. Mara looked at him and said, "It wasn't about my feet." I felt my ribs expand like I had just remembered how to breathe. The judge asked if there were prior partners who could corroborate a pattern. Abby stood. The air in my mouth went briefly metallic. She didn't look at Brock. She looked at the judge and at the wood grain of the stand like she was reading lines in a poem. She told the truth again, without flinching. How he'd teased until it landed like a slap. How any boundary was framed as an affront. How he liked to say her full name in rooms with other people in them so it sounded like an invoice. When the judge asked if she felt unsafe then, she didn't dramatize. She said, "I felt managed." There was a little murmur in the room like a breeze through a paper mobile. Brock's lawyer tried to trip over the years between. He asked if maybe Abby was still emotional. This made Abby's eyebrows do a thing I've only seen when she's watching a really dumb movie and a character announces they're going into the basement without a flashlight. "I'm a human being," she said. "I have emotions. That doesn't make this untrue." The judge set down her pen and looked at all of us in turn like she was lining up puzzles pieces. Then she granted the order. Real words, formal and heavy, and a piece of paper that now meant the world was slightly rearranged. On the way out, Brock did what men like him do in the absence of an audience. He muttered. Nothing specific, not loud enough for anyone but those who already knew his weather to hear. Drama, I caught, and something like overcorrection. His shoe squeaked on the polished marble, a ridiculous noise, and he had to glance down to adjust his pace. The bailiff's boots thudded behind us. Outside the sky had the color of an old bruise, but there was air, not that recirculated courthouse air but the kind that carries baking bread from the cafe across the street. We walked to a taco truck with our heads still in the courtroom and stood there while a man with a hairnet chopped cilantro so fast it sounded like rain. Abby ordered for both of us. She said my order without looking at the menu and then added horchata like she always does when she thinks I look too wrung out to make decisions. We sat on a curb. Abby took a bite and got salsa on the corner of her mouth and didn't wipe it immediately. She looked back at the courthouse doors and shook her head once, very small, like she was coaxing a stiff joint to bend. Then she took off one sandal, set her bare foot on top of my shoe, and left it there, warm and sand gritty and ordinary. "I'm keeping this name," she said, and it took me a second to realize she meant Abby. He doesn't get to say it anymore. That night felt strange and simple. The house made all its usual noises, the upstairs neighbor's sink coughing, the distant hum of someone's dryer tumbling zippers, and none of them sounded like anything but what they were. Abby took the mint green bowl, the one that had survived the purge, and put it on the little table by the door. She dropped her keys into it and they made a sound like a bell in an empty church. Then she rummaged in a drawer and came back with a cheap bottle of nail polish, a color it would be dramatic to call red and better to call tomato. She perched on the arm of the couch and painted her nails with the care of someone buttering toast. When she finished she wiggled them in the lamp light. "Not for me, exactly, but also absolutely for me." "Not for Friday," she said. "For me." Mara texted later that she was staying with a friend and had an appointment at a clinic where an advocate would meet her. She thanked Abby again, and then, this made my throat go tight in a way I'll probably feel embarrassed about later, she sent a picture of her hand holding a paper cup of coffee, the hair tie off her wrist and tangled around the cup. Instead. No bruises in the frame. Just skin and sunlight. We went to bed and didn't talk about any of it for a while. We lay there in the dark and listened to each other blink. At some point Abby said, "I've been thinking about that pottery class you mentioned." She tucked her toes under my calf like she always does, a small, private claim. "I emailed the studio," she added, and I could hear the grin she wasn't letting loose yet. "There isn't a magic door you walk through where all the old wiring stops humming. The draft is real. But so is the way the house smells like olive oil and lemon when she cooks, and the way she looks at me sometimes in the middle of nothing like we are in the first bright scene of something." Today she came home with a flyer smudged with clay and an apple in her pocket, and when she kicked off her shoes at the door, they landed in a neat heap beside mine, and I had that mild, ridiculous thought, again that feels like a new one each time. I get to be here. I get to be the one she puts her feet on. I get to be the name she says because she wants to. Update 4. It didn't start with anything dramatic. It started with clay. Abby's pottery class meets on Thursdays in a low building behind a bike repair shop, the kind of place that smells like dust and heat even when the kilns are asleep. She sent me a photo of her hands, clay to her wrists like she'd been gardening under the earth instead of above it, and beneath, a little gray cylinder she'd trimmed into what the instructor called a foot. "It's the part it stands on," Abby wrote, as if that weren't exactly the sort of sentence that would lodge in my chest and live there. On the drive home, 2 blocks short of our street, her phone chirped a sound that didn't belong to any of our usual domestic chorus. Not the car's seatbelt scold, not my texts, not the tiny triumphant ding of email. A colder, more official sound, her screen lit with words that looked like they'd been typed by a careful stranger. "AirTag found moving with you." She pulled into the gas station we never use because the pump handles smell like old rain and chemicals. She put the car in park and sat so straight her shoulders looked borrowed. Then she called me. By the time I got there, the sky had folded itself into that pink that means you will smell lighter fluid on the wind from somebody's grill. Abby was standing with her keys clenched in her fist like a weapon you could also hang laundry with. "It could be nothing," she said, and it was so obviously not nothing that I loved her for the ritual of pretending for 5 seconds. I didn't touch her, not yet. I went straight to the car. You can make an AirTag chirp if you tell it to. On her screen there was a button that said play sound, and when she tapped it, we heard the strangest little noise. Not a siren, not an alarm, a quick, cheerful metallic note, like someone dropping a button into a jar 3 feet away. It was coming from under the car. I lowered myself onto the oil-stained concrete and slid my hand up along the spare tire well. Dirt came off on my knuckles like old chalk. The chirp sounded again, a bright insect clicking. My fingers hit something smooth and hard, a shape that didn't belong to any undercarriage. A small black circle snapped into a rubber-backed magnet, stuck just out of line of sight. I pried it free and put it in my palm. Tiny, polite, and hateful. Abby said okay, in the exact tone people use when the thing they feared becomes a fact. She didn't sit down on the curb or fold, she put her hand on the hood like she was grounding herself on something that had carried her home 100 times. "Okay," she said again, and then, "We should go to the station." The desk sergeant looked like a man who knows what kind of coffee everyone takes. He had a pen tucked into the same place in his shirt pocket so often it had made a permanent shadow. He listened with that quiet that tells you somebody is building shelves in their mind so they can put things away later where they belong. He didn't make a face at the word. He just got a pair of blue gloves out of a drawer and slid them on like a magician who hates theatrics. "Don't unpair it," he said, which made me feel like there were 100 ways to ruin this kind of evidence and we were walking among them barefoot. He put the little thing in a zip-top bag like it was rare candy and then in another bag and wrote a case number on a label in blocky letters with no flourishes. When Abby mentioned the order, his eyes flickered once to me, once back to her, and he nodded. He called someone else. He said our names as if they were new to him and worth pronouncing correctly. The detective showed up with a pencil behind his ear that he even remembered to take out when he wrote, which, for some reason made me trust him more. He asked if either of us had iCloud accounts. He asked if we'd gotten any other alerts. He asked if we'd be comfortable giving access to Apple's legal department when the request went through. It was not TV fast. It was the pace of real paper traveling through real hands. He told us what would happen next in declarative sentences that made room for air. They'd bag it, they'd send the request, there might be a match, we'd get a call either way. He didn't promise. He said what he could. Abby's jaw unclenched just enough that I could see the half-moon indent from where she'd been biting her cheek. When we stepped back out, the night had developed a temperature. The neon beer sign across the street was pretending to be colder than it was. We drove home with the windows cracked and didn't talk to keep the old wiring from hearing itself echo. In the living room, Abby set her phone face down on the table like it was asleep. Then she went and got the mint green bowl and put it in my hands for a second with this strange, ceremonial gravity. "Hold it," she said. So I did. It had weight I hadn't paid attention to when it was just the place where keys clanged at the end of the day. It was heavier than it looked. It was imperfect and it balanced. At 2 a.m. the refrigerator did its haunted house sigh and Abby said into the dark, "If I'm scared, it's not because I miss him." She sounded tired and exact. "It's because my body is smart." In the morning, I made pancakes like I could bribe the day into being gentle with dumb sweetness. Abby ate 2 and left half of a third because she doesn't like to feel too full before she drives. She put on the same sandals she always puts on and then stopped, slipped them back off and looked at her toes like they belonged to her all the way to the last cells. I want to show up at the studio, she said. I'm not losing a Thursday. I'll text Lita, that's the instructor with the forearm tattoo of a fern that looks like it was drawn with a blunt pencil, and tell her what's going on. There was a patrol car that did a slow pass by our block at 10 and again at noon. It was not a parade and not for show. The officer inside had the same posture as the sergeant, that practiced ordinary. He gave the smallest lift of his hand at me through the glass and then went back to being a shape in a mirror as he moved away. Abby brought home a cylinder of clay with a little ridge at the bottom and the kind of grin you see on kids who have learned to whistle. I made another foot, she said, and then laughed at herself and made a face and added, for a bowl. She set it on the table and we both stared at it like it had said something important. If you pressed your finger to the underside you could feel the ring, a clean little circle that would keep it from wobbling. Lita says the part you don't see is as much the work, Abby said. Otherwise it won't sit. The detective called on Sunday, which felt illegal and also kind. He said the device had been activated 6 days ago. He said some things I couldn't hear over the water running in the sink because I suddenly needed to be washing an apple like it had offended me, and then I heard the sentence that felt like someone had pressed their hand between my shoulder blades and kept it there until my spine remembered being straight. We have subscriber information. He didn't say the name. He said there would be a visit. He said the order gave them teeth. He told Abby he'd call her first if they needed her to come in again and then told her he hoped he wouldn't. It is a strange thing to exist in a day where a person you once loved may or may not be having the kind of morning where someone knocks on their door and uses their last name with duty in it. It is stranger to find out before lunch that the knock happened. The detective again, an hour later, voice contained, said they'd served him. He said the state had also filed charges for violation. He said a date. He said you will not be expected. He did not say congratulations and neither did we. We went to the studio that evening because Lita was firing a kiln and said if we brought marshmallows she'd let us toast them on skewers near the opening where the heat leaps out like something with a personality. The room was warm in a way that has nothing to do with weather. Shelves upon shelves of other people's attempts glowed the color of dry bones. Lita showed Abby how to sign her name at the bottom of her bowl with a needle tool, not pressed and hard enough to cut, just enough that the glaze would make the line a secret and not a shout. Abby wrote Abby, carefully, the curve of the Y like a curtain closing. On the way home, Abby did that thing she does when she's sorting, where she narrates just enough for the words to organize themselves. He bought a thing to find me, she said. A thing you can buy at a store where someone will say, do you want a gift receipt? Her voice had turned the dry kind of wry that comes when shock wears down to its minimal shape. I am not a something you misplace. She put her feet on the dash and then crossed her ankles and then uncrossed them, restless energy, with prettier clothes. I'm going to get a stamp, she added after a minute. Like for clay. With my name. So I don't have to draw it every time. That night we didn't make anything into a ritual except washing our hands longer than necessary. Abby painted her nails again with the tomato color because the first coat had been scraped by 800 tiny abrasive layers of clay. She held her hand up to the lamp again like light was a test she wanted to pass. For me, she said, but this time she didn't need to say it. The words were the last thing in the room that still thought they had to work as hard as she did. Mara sent a photo the next day of a plant cutting in a jar on a windowsill. Free, she typed, meaning the plant and herself. She said the order made her feel like she had lines to color inside and that she had always been good at coloring inside lines as a kid. Abby wrote back, you can also draw new ones. It felt like the kind of exchange that doesn't belong to the internet but somehow has to happen there to be real. She put the phone upside down on the table and spun it absent-mindedly on its case and then stopped it with her palm and said, do you think it's too earnest to stamp a foot on the bottom of a bowl? She tried to look like she was joking. I said, only if you pretend it's not, and she made that face where her mouth fights her eyes and then loses. We still haven't replaced the chair leg I keep threatening to fix. It wobbles in this endearing way when someone sits down too hard, and the mint green bowl rings like a tiny bell when you drop your keys into it with more enthusiasm than grace. The detective said we did everything right. The bailiff from before was at the grocery store and nodded at us in the cereal aisle with the same grave courtesy he had in a courtroom, and I almost laughed into the cornflakes. There isn't a ribbon you cut at the end of a stocking. There's paperwork and a date on a calendar and the smell of somebody else's cologne lingering half a second longer than you want in the door of a place you happen to walk past. There's also Lita showing Abby how to turn the foot on a piece so it sits, and Abby coming home with clay under her nails and not apologizing for the mess it makes on our sink. There's our front door clicking behind us and our names sounding like we chose them, and there's Abby setting her bare feet on top of my shoes at the stove while I stir something that hisses like the businesslike little AirTag did, and refusing to flinch at the echo. We found a thing that was hiding under us. We pulled it off. We handed it to people whose job is to say, this is unacceptable, out loud into record, and then we went and learned how to make the bottom of a bowl beautiful, the part that touches the table and keeps everything else level. Abby pressed a stamp into damp clay today, the letters sunk in cleanly, no need to scratch. It will get hotter than seems kind. It will come out changed and strong and ordinary. It will sit the way it's supposed to. And when she hands it to me, I will turn it over, just once, just to admire the quiet fact of the name and the foot that holds.